The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge Dimension Shellshock DLC just released a few weeks ago. As of writing the script. Oops. And with it came some new palette swaps for each of the characters. So why don't we have a look at them and point out the references for each one? First off, we have Leonardo, whose default palette is from the 1987 cartoon. His second palette references the 1988 Playmates action figure. You can see this with the orange weapons, shade of green skin, black belt, and fully white eyes. His third palette references the 1990 live-action movie. You can tell by his olive green skin tone and brown arms, as well as his knee pads and the all-brown belt. His fourth palette references the 2003 cartoon. You can once again tell by the skin tone and brown pads, his all-brown belt, and also his white eyes. His fifth palette references the 2012 cartoon. You can see this with the skin tone, brown pads, all-brown belt, and the color of the weapon handles, not to mention his blue eyes. His sixth palette references the Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon. You can tell this from the skin color, the katanas, the bluish-gray pads representing his fingerless gloves, and toeless footwear, as well as the belt being the same bluish-gray with the green belt buckle representing the shell icon he has on his belt in the series. His seventh palette references the intergalactic wrestling outfit from the Archie comics. We can see this with the bandana going over his head and with his orange belt with a silver belt buckle. As Sonic Toast pointed out in his video, which I recommend you go and watch, link in description, he said that Leo's katana blades could be referencing his armor, but it's unclear. As I was writing the script, I decided to ask one of the developers of the game about this. He said they thought of giving his bandana and elbow/knee pads a metallic color at first, but it didn't look very good given the material rendering isn't metallic. Take this as you will. His eighth palette references the Super 7 Mutagen Ooze Glow action figures. You can see this with the glowing skin and weapons as well as a blue belt. His ninth palette references the black and white Mirage comics. He has a blue bandana so you can tell him apart from the other black and white turtles more easily. His 10th palette references Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, The Manhattan Project on the NES, with his 11th palette referencing the Game Boy Turtles games. Next, we have Michelangelo, with his default palette being from the 1987 cartoon. His second palette references the 1988 Playmates action figure with the orange weapons, the specific shade of green skin, the black belt, and the fully white eyes. His third palette references the 1990 movie, again with the olive green skin tone, brown pads, and brown belt. His fourth palette references the 2003 cartoon with the white eyes, skin tone, brown pads, and brown belt. His fifth palette references the 2012 cartoon with the skin tone, brown pads and belt, the nunchuck sticks, and his blue eyes. His sixth palette references Rise of the TMNT with the skin color, the nunchuck sticks, the brown belt, and the green belt buckle representing the shell icon on his belt in that series. His seventh palette references the intergalactic wrestling outfit from the Archie comics with the orange face mask and the all-orange belt. His eighth palette references the Super 7 Mutagen Ooze Glow action figure with the glowing skin, glowing weapons, and orange belt. His ninth palette references the black and white Mirage comics with an orange bandana to help you tell him apart from the other black and white palettes more easily. His 10th palette references the Manhattan Project, with his 11th palette referencing the Game Boy games. On to Raphael, with his default palette being from the 1987 cartoon. His second palette references the 1988 Playmates action figure with the orange weapons, white eyes, a particular shade of green skin, and black belt. His third palette references the 1990 movie, with the olive green skin tone, brown pads, and brown belt. His fourth palette references the 2003 cartoon with his shade of green skin, his white eyes, his brown pads, and his brown belt. His fifth palette references the 2012 cartoon with the skin tone, brown pads, brown belt, color of the weapon handles, and his green eyes. His sixth palette references Rise of the TMNT with the skin color, the side being all brown to represent his tonfa, the white pads representing the sports tape he wears, and the red belt and green belt buckle to represent the shell icon as well as an overhead bandana. His seventh palette references his intergalactic wrestling outfit from the Archie comics, with an all-black look. His eighth palette references the Super 7 Mutagen Oozglow action figure with glowing skin, glowing weapons, and a fully red belt. His ninth palette references the black and white Mirage comics with a red bandana to help you tell them apart from the other black and white palettes more easily. His 10th palette references the Manhattan Project, with his 11th palette referencing the Game Boy games. Moving to Donatello, with his default palette also being from the 1987 cartoon. His second palette references the 1988 Playmates action figure with the orange weapon, white eyes, a particular shade of green skin, and black belt. His third palette is based on the 1990 movie with the olive green skin tone, brown pads, and brown belt. His fourth palette references the 2003 cartoon with the shade of green skin, white eyes, the purple tape on his bow, brown pads, and brown belt. His fifth palette references the 2012 cartoon with the skin tone, brown pads, brown belt, and reddish brown eyes. His sixth palette references Rise of the TMNT with the skin color, his bow being mostly gray and dark blue to represent his tech bow, his shell being purple to represent his battle shell, and the purple belt with a green belt buckle to represent the shell icon as well as an overhead bandana. His seventh palette references his intergalactic wrestling outfit from the Archie comics, with his red wrestler mask having the yellow stripes, his yellow pads, and his fully red belt. His eighth palette references the Super 7 Mutagen Oozglow action figure with the glowing skin, glowing weapons, and purple belt. His ninth palette references the black and white Mirage comics, but following the trend gives him a purple bandana to help you tell him apart from the other black and white palettes. His 10th palette references the Manhattan Project, with his 11th palette referencing the Game Boy games. Moving on with April, her default palette is yet again from the 1987 cartoon. Her second palette has a green jumpsuit with yellow boots, yellow belt, yellow collar, and yellow microphone, which is a reference to the 1993 Playmates Toon April action figure that came with the Channel 6 news van. Her third palette has a purple top and orangish bottom, referencing one of the outfits Judith Hoag's April wears in the 1990 movie. Her fourth palette has pink hair, a purple top, and a beige bottom, referencing her look in the 2003 cartoon. Her belt even matches her skin color to represent her crop top in the show. Her fifth palette has a black jumpsuit with yellow stripes on the side, as well as ginger hair referencing her Kunoichi jumpsuit in the 2012 cartoon. Her sixth palette has brunette hair, a yellow top, a black collar, a white belt, a blue bottom, and black boots, which references Megan Fox's April outfit in the Michael Bay TMNT movies. Her seventh palette has reddish-orange hair with a red top that has a blue collar, a blue bottom with red boots, which references April's design in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters for the Sega Genesis. This palette also has a belt that matches her skin color. Her eighth palette has a more orangish sort of hair with a brown top, green collar, yellow bottom, and brown boots, which references the Red Sky seasons of the 1987 cartoon. Her 9th palette references the Black and White Mirage comics. Her 10th palette references the Manhattan Project, with her 11th palette referencing the Game Boy games. Moving on, we have Splinter. His default palette is once again from the 1987 cartoon. His second palette has a slightly brighter pink kimono than the default, an orange cane, darker fur, a gray tail, gray bandages, and white eyes referencing the 1988 Playmates action figure. His third palette has a slightly darker fur color than the default with a lighter brown cane, white kimono, and pink tail, which references the 1990 movie. His fourth palette has bluish-gray fur, a red kimono, a beige cane, and a pink tail, which references the 2003 cartoon. His fifth palette has reddish-brown fur, a bluish-gray cane, a red kimono, and brown eyes, which references the 2012 cartoon. It's kinda weird though, cause his cane is green in the show. Anyways, moving on. His sixth palette has gray fur, a yellow kimono, a maroonish cane, and a pink tail, which references Rise of the TMNT. His seventh palette has a yellow kimono, a beige cane, and white eyes, referencing his look in a colored Mirage illustration. His eighth palette has an all-blue ghostly look to it, which references the spirit of Splinter from the 1998 live-action movie. His ninth palette references the Black and White Mirage comics. His 10th palette references TMNT Tournament Fighters on the NES, with his 11th palette referencing the Game Boy games. Moving on to Casey Jones, with his default palette being from, you won't believe it, the 1987 cartoon. His second palette has a teal shirt, a green shoulder pad, a green sports bag, green gloves, green shoes, and bluish-green sports equipment referencing the 1989 Playmates action figure. His third palette has grayish-based mash straps, a slightly darker brown shoulder pad, a sports bag, gloves, and shoes. His equipment is a beige color instead of a gray, a black shirt, and his sweatpants are more of an actual gray than a bluish gray, referencing the 1990 movie, with the shirt representing his vest in the movie. His fourth palette has blue hair, a red shirt, blue sweatpants, a black shoulder pad with a reddish rim, a black sports bag, black gloves, black shoes, and gray sports equipment referencing the 2003 cartoon. His fifth palette has brown mash straps, gray skin, a black shoulder pad, a black sports bag, black gloves, black shoes, bluish-gray sweatpants, and beige sports equipment referencing the 2012 cartoon, with the gray skin representing the shirt he wears under the sleeveless hoodie in that show. His sixth palette has mask straps that match his hair color, a red mask, a red shoulder pad, a red sports bag, red gloves, red shoes, a black shirt, black sweatpants, and gray sports equipment referencing Cassandra Jones from the Rise of the TMNT. His seventh palette has brown hair, orange mask straps, a darkish teal shoulder pad, a darkish teal sports bag, darkish teal gloves, darkish teal shoes, a yellow shirt, lavender sweatpants, and orange sports equipment referencing TMNT Tournament Fighters on the Sega Genesis. His eighth palette has gray mask straps, a lighter brown shoulder pad with an orange rim, a lighter brown sports bag, lighter brown gloves, lighter brown shoes, an orange shirt, bluish-gray sweatpants, and gray sports equipment referencing his first appearance in the Mirage comics. His ninth palette references the Black and White Mirage comics. His 10th palette references TMNT Tournament Fighters on the NES, with his 11th palette being a Game Boy inspired palette to match with the others, as Casey was never in a Game Boy Turtles game. Now we move on to the two newly added DLC characters. Starting with Usagi, his default palette is from No way, the 1987 cartoon. Who would have guessed? His second palette has a purple hair tie, a darker blue and yellow kimono, a yellow belt, orange weapons, and purplish pants, referencing the 1989 Playmates action figure. Now his third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, 8th, and 9th palettes all reference pop culture samurai characters. I've tried doing research but was unable to find the references, sadly. Moving on, his 10th palette references the black and white Usagi Yojimbo comics to match the other black and white palettes. His 11th palette references the game Samurai Warrior: The Battles of Usagi Yojimbo on the Commodore 64, with his 12th palette being another Game Boy inspired palette, made to match the other Game Boy palettes. And yes, I did say 12. Usagi and Karai were giving 12 palettes instead of 11 like the others. Finally, we have Karai, with her default palette actually not being from the 1987 cartoon. She wasn't in the 1987 cartoon, so this is basically a what if Karai was in the 1987 cartoon palette, so she matches with the others. Moving on, her second palette has a yellowish brown bandana, a yellowish brown vest, a yellowish brown belt, a red tight shirt, and red leggings, referencing her look in The Last Ronin. Her third palette has a gray and black color scheme, as well as a pinkish red bandana and a pinkish red belt, referencing the 2007 movie. Her fourth palette has a pinkish red bandana, a pinkish red belt, a blue vest, a black tight shirt, and black leggings, referencing her look in the 2003 cartoon. Her fifth palette has pale skin, a purple bandana, a purple belt, a bluish black tight shirt, bluish black leggings, and a silverish vest, and silverish metal bracers, referencing the 2012 cartoon. Her sixth palette has brown hair, a red bandana, a red belt, a purple tight shirt, purple leggings, and a gray vest, referencing TMNT Tournament Fighters on the Sega Genesis. Her seventh palette has a reddish brown hair, an orange bandana, an orange belt, a light orange vest, a darkish blue tight shirt, and darkish blue leggings, referencing her Player 2 palette from TMNT Tournament Fighters on the SNES. Her eighth palette has navy blue hair, a red-orange bandana, a red-orange belt, a light orange vest, a pinkish-purple tight shirt, and pinkish-purple leggings, referencing her Player 1 palette from TMNT Tournament Fighters on the SNES. Her ninth palette has brown hair, a white bandana, a white belt, a white vest, a red tight shirt, red leggings, and light yellow bracers, referencing Asuka from TMNT Tournament Fighters on the SNES. Her 10th palette references the black and white Mirage comics. Her 11th palette is another What If palette, this time to match the 8-bit palettes. Her 12th palette is yet another What If palette, made to match the other Game Boy palettes. And that's it! All 101 palettes covered. This video was really fun to make, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you would consider subscribing to the channel, it would help out greatly. That's enough out of me for now. See ya!